Royalty in Ruin, Chapter 12. The prophet loses faith and panics. With the prophets of Baal killed, the way was opened for a mighty spiritual reformation. The judgments of heaven had been executed. The people had confessed their sins and acknowledged the God of their fathers. Now the curse was to be withdrawn, and the land refreshed with rain. "Go up, eat and drink," Elijah said to Ahab, "for there is the sound of abundance of rain." Then the prophet went to the top of the mountain to pray. He saw no clouds in the heavens. He heard no thunder. All that day he had revealed his complete confidence in God's words, and now he knew that heaven would bestow the blessings predicted. The same God who had sent the drought had promised rain as the reward of right-doing. In humility, Elijah pleaded with God on behalf of repentant Israel. Again and again he sent his servant to a point overlooking the Mediterranean to see whether there was any visible evidence that God had heard his prayer. Each time the servant returned with the word, "There is nothing." The prophet did not lose faith, but continued pleading. 6 times the servant returned with the word that there was no sign of rain. Undaunted, Elijah sent him once more. This time the servant returned with the word, "There is a cloud, as small as a man's hand, rising out of the sea." This was enough. In that small cloud, by faith, Elijah saw an abundance of rain. He acted in harmony with his faith, sending his servant quickly to Ahab with a message, "Prepare your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Because Elijah was a man of large faith, God could use him. His faith grasped the promises of heaven, and he persisted in prayer. He did not wait for the full evidence that God had heard him, but was willing to commit everything on the slightest sign of divine favor. And what he was enabled to do under God, all may do in their own sphere in God's service. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. James chapter 5, verse 17. Faith such as this is needed today. Faith that will lay hold of the promises of God's word. Faith that brings strength for coping with the powers of darkness. Through faith, God's children have conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 33 and 34, NRSV. Faith is an essential element of effective prayer. He who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. With the persistence of Elijah, we may present our requests to the Father. He has staked the honor of his throne on the fulfillment of his word. Night was approaching on Mount Carmel as Ahab prepared for the descent. Now it happened in the meantime that the sky became black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy rain. So Ahab rode away and went to Jezreel. As he traveled toward the royal city through the darkness and blinding rain, he was unable to see in front of him. That day Elijah had humiliated him before his subjects and killed his idolatrous priests, but the prophet still acknowledged Ahab as Israel's king. Now, as an act of homage, Elijah ran before the royal chariot, guiding the king to the city. There is a lesson in this gracious act shown to a wicked king for all who claim to be servants of God. Some people hesitate to perform humble duties, fearing that they will be doing the work of a servant. Elijah had been dramatically honored by God as fire had flashed from heaven and consumed the sacrifice. His prayer for rain had been granted, and yet after God had been pleased to honor his public ministry, he was willing to perform the service of a footman. Jezebel threatens Elijah's life. At the gate of Jezreel, Elijah and Ahab separated. The prophet, choosing to remain outside the walls, wrapped himself in his cloak and lay down on the bare earth to sleep. The king soon reached the shelter of his palace and reported to his wife the events of the day. As Ahab told about how the idolatrous prophets had been killed, Jezebel, hardened and unrepentant, became infuriated. She refused to recognize the overruling hand of God, and still defiant, boldly declared that Elijah must die. That night a messenger awoke the weary prophet and delivered the words of Jezebel. "So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." It would seem that after showing such unfailing courage, and after triumphing so completely over king and priest and people, Elijah could never afterward give way to discouragement or become frightened and timid. But in this dark hour, his faith and courage forsook him. Bewildered, he was startled from his sleep. The rain was pouring from the heavens, and darkness was all around. Forgetting that 3 years before, God had directed him to a place of safety, the prophet now ran for his life. Elijah's lack of faith. Elijah should not have run. He should have met Jezebel's threat with an appeal for protection to the one who had commissioned him. He should have told the messenger that God in whom he trusted would protect him against the queen's hatred. If he had made God his refuge and strength, he would have been shielded from harm. The Lord would have sent his judgments on Jezebel, and the impression made on the king and people would have brought about a great reformation. Elijah had hoped that after the miracle on Mount Carmel, Jezebel would no longer have influence over Ahab, and that reform would come quickly to all Israel. All day on Carmel he had gone without food. Yet when he guided the chariot of Ahab to Jezreel, his courage was strong despite the physical strain. But a reaction frequently follows high faith and glorious success. Elijah feared that the reformation begun might not be lasting, and depression seized him. In this time of discouragement, with Jezebel's threat sounding in his ears and Satan still apparently in control, he lost his hold on God. Elijah's complete despondency. Forgetting God, Elijah ran on and on until he found himself in a dreary wasteland, alone. Bone-weary, he sat down to rest under a juniper tree, and requested that he might die. "It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." His spirit was crushed by bitter disappointment, and he wanted never again to look on a human face. At last, exhausted, he fell asleep. Times of keen disappointment and discouragement come to everyone. Days when it is hard to believe that God is still kind. Days when troubles follow us till death seems preferable to life. Then many lose their hold on God and become slaves of doubt and unbelief. At such times, if we could unravel the meanings of God's leadings, we would see angels seeking to save us from ourselves, working to plant our feet on a firm foundation, and new faith, new life would spring into being. In his trouble and darkness, faithful Job declared, "May the day perish on which I was born. Oh, that I might have my request. My soul chooses death. I loathe my life." Job chapter 3, verse 3, chapter 6, verse 8, chapter 7, verse 15 and 16. But though he was weary of life, Job was not allowed to die. To him was given the message of hope. "You will forget your misery. You will remember it as waters that have passed away. And your life will be brighter than the noonday. Its darkness will be like the morning." Job chapter 11, verse 16 and 17, NRSV. From the depths of despair, Job rose to the heights of trust in God. Triumphantly he declared, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God." Job chapter 19, verse 25 and 26. When Job caught a glimpse of his Creator, he abhorred himself and repented in dust and ashes. Job chapter 42, verse 6. Then the Lord was able to bless him and make his last years the best of his life. Despondency is sinful and unreasonable. God is willing to bestow more abundantly, Hebrews chapter 6, verse 17, on his servants the strength they need. The enemies of his work may make plans that seem firmly established, but God can overthrow the strongest of these. For the disheartened, there is a sure remedy: faith, prayer, work. Are you tempted to give in to worry, dread, or hopelessness? In the darkest days, when things appear at their worst, don't be afraid. God knows your need. His infinite love and compassion never run out. He will never change the covenant he has made with those who love him. And he will give his faithful servants the efficiency that their need demands. Paul has testified. He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. For when I am weak, then I am strong." 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 and 10. Did God forsake Elijah in his ordeal? No. He loved his servant no less than when he felt forsaken by God and man. And now a soft touch and a pleasant voice awoke him. The pitying face bending over him was not the face of an enemy, but of a friend. God had sent an angel with food. "Arise and eat," the angel said. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. After Elijah had eaten and drunk, he slept again. A second time the angel touched the exhausted man and said with pitying tenderness, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." In the strength of that food he was able to journey 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God, where he found refuge in a cave.